Hello, welcome to Crow's Shiny Things, where we discuss the state of Flesh and Blood's casual environment. Today we're kicking off a series on PvE where we look at what's come before, starting with a favorite for many, Legend of the Five Rings. Let's talk about it. So, Legend of the Five Rings is a absolutely beautiful game that started many years ago now and has gone through multiple iterations. It started with a card game by AEG Publishing, Alderac Publishing, and they ran it for years as a very successful but small trading card game that was really popular with really a broad selection of players for a number of reasons. They did some things really fantastically, and we want to talk about those today. Eventually, AEG had to stop publishing this game. When they did, it had to go to, or it was bought up by Fantasy Flight. The final piece that it presented was this, which was Under Leng's Shadow. This was the cooperative PvE expansion for Legend of the Five Rings. And this was the final thing that they put out before the game was shuttered. It's really something of a shame, given that I'm sure the designers, when they were working on this, did not realize that this expansion was not going to get any time in release that they thought it was going to get, that it was not going to have an opportunity to breathe more life into the game, but instead was just a parting gift to the players in a game that could have been far more successful. So, all of that said, why are we looking at it? Well, we're looking at it because, and you can see I have my Flesh and Blood Azalea deck over here with Azalea Death Dealer. I had been playing around with New Horizon, but most of the time I'm using the Scuba Crunch Wrap. And then I have a Crab deck and the decks from the new Legend of Leng, Under Leng's Shadow expansion. This game really was beautiful in its execution. It did the art and the story so well that it's really hard to overstate how much of an asset the art of this property was. And it inspired so many beautiful pieces. You can see here, these are the tokens that were done by Team Covenant. These were really fantastic looking pieces. They are wood and metal, burnished out with different color on each side, blue and red for political and combat challenges. There's some beautiful metal tokens for honored and dishonored there. From Luxury Tokens, I think it is, on Etsy. Wonderful work. Beautiful. The cards themselves were an absolute work of art. Like, this is Shiro Nishijima. It's one of the holdings for the Crab Clan. Beautiful. This mat is actually one of Chris Ostkowski's pieces. He was one of the artists for it. He did some great work. Briefly sold some of his mats back in 2017, and I was lucky enough to pick one up. I think I have another one in the other room. Some of the things that this did well includes the art, though. It made a game that people wanted to look through and play. They wanted to get these cards out on a table because they're so beautiful. The other thing that this game did really well was that it created a story experience for us. This game gave us a reason to want to go through and play. Every player who was in the game had at least one favorite clan that was theirs, that they would try and play at almost every event. For me, it was Crab. So I played almost all of my events as the Crab clan. That meant that if I had any wins at an event, I was affecting the storyline for the crab, and I was adding to the wins for my clan. And that feeling of community embedded into the story is one of the best things that this game did. Now, the expansion for PvE specifically also did a thing that was wonderful, in that it has a couple of different modes that it expanded the game into. It allowed for a cooperative mode and it allowed for a raid-style challenge mode. Those two options gave players something to go do and to a different mode of play, so that they had three entirely separate modes. They had the traditional PvP mode of play, where it was one-on-one, crab versus scorpion or whatever. And then they could go against the Shadowlands environment, picking out one of the main villains that were introduced with this, and fighting against them and their Shadowlands armies. Really flavorful, wonderful pieces, wonderful art. Really a lovely addition to it. That mode of operation, the co-op and the challenge mode, meant that really players around the kitchen table had something to do when they wanted to go play this game. They could be excited about it at home in a way that was not just a head-to-head match, which sometimes in a casual or kitchen table environment is not always the best. And so that was a great way to expand the game to do something better for a different set of players than is their usual. Something else that it did fantastically well that I must mention is the prizing support that it sometimes did for events. I went to the first PAX Unplugged, and Legend of the Five Rings played at that event. It had a fairly large tournament at it. A friend of mine and I went. We were not really big into tournaments for TCGs, but we thought it would be fun. And this is what they gave as a prize for playing. Not for winning, you didn't have to do anything other than show up and play your chosen clan. Because when you registered with a clan. So I registered with the Crab Clan, and I got 3 of these extended art Seal of the Crab cards, right? A playset for me. But what they did extra was they gave another playset of these. So I had 6. And then at the start of my first 3 games of the event, you were to trade one of your sets of 6 with the opponent, so that at the end of the event you would go home with your set of 3 plus 1 for each opponent that you played from their clans. So I played Seal of the Phoenix, so I played a Phoenix player, and I played 2 Lion players, so I actually have 2 Seal of the Lion. That makes for a really fun and interesting take home, a thing that I can't get hardly anywhere else, but gave me something to talk about with the person that I sat down across from, and let me give them something that I didn't have to bring, and it made a connection. It was a wonderful way to start off an event and to give those first 3 rounds that prizing support meant that I, as a casual player, someone who doesn't go in and make it to the deep top 8 of a tournament, I had something that I could take home that was a real unique piece for this event. It was really a lovely touch on their part. So, what did L5R do wrong, though? Well, mainly, it was complexity. If you pay attention to Team Covenant's Power 7 series on their podcast, they go through a series of mistakes that other games have made, and one of those Power 7 is a memory problem. L5R has the memory problem. too many of the decisions that you make every single round are too deep and too far branching. Your average player loses track of it, and they quickly become meaningless decisions. It's too much to pay attention to. So by the end of it, you're left with people who want a really intricate at the table experience, which for some people was fabulous. But for a lot of us who just want to sit down and play a game, I found it nearly impossible to find players who were willing to sit down and work through an entire evening's worth of play, because we might not get more than one game or a game and a half in an evening, simply because it was too complex and it took too long to work through. That complexity was an Achilles heel. So what can FaB learn from this? Flesh and Blood already balances a bit on the edge of too complicated for some folks. It's not that we have to reference a manual or go look up rules all the time, but there are a lot of moving parts, right? Just to play Azalea, to remember that my arrows have to go through my arsenal and how I have to put them into that arsenal, how I have to use Death Dealer for those things. For some people, that gets to be just a little bit too much compared to what they would rather be doing. They would rather just be playing it out in a very steady, easily understood process. And we'll talk about some other games in the series that do that very well. That isn't to say that Flesh and Blood is too complicated. I don't think it is. But some people may find that a minor barrier to entry. If it's already a limitation for some people, right? Deck building is a problem for some folks. They don't want it. That's why games like Keyforge do so well, because you don't have to worry about that. If those things are already keeping people out, we need to be concerned about anything that ramps up that difficulty level, especially when it's aimed at those people who might really be enjoying your game, if not for some of the complex edges to it. PvE, hopefully, will be something that stays in the same complexity mode that PvP, Flesh and Blood, is at right now, and doesn't fall into the trap that L5R kind of fell into, where the complexity level goes up with the PvP environment that they did. But that's on the negative side. That's what's the thing that Flesh and Blood can't do from this game? And it can't go hardcore into a complex game state that drives away players who are looking for a fun evening of activity against a boss or a set of minions. It can't ratchet up that difficulty. But what can I learn from it on the positive side? Well, there's a couple of things. Number one, I think, is the joy of integrating this into the game world. Flesh and Blood has a very rich game world, and integrating the play of PvE into that game world so that it matters that we are adventuring into the pits, or maybe going to do something into metrics, that changes how things play, the themes that are going on in the game. That thematic approach is going to be vital to making sure that PvE succeeds. And if it doesn't have that, it's going to be a problem. So it needs to have that connection to the PvE world that they have created. Show me the difference between Mysteria and the Savage Lands. Make the PvE bosses that are set in those areas different. Just like they've made the characters and the classes different and thematically approachable. Beautiful work on that. I have every confidence they will keep it up. But that's one of the biggest takeaways. The other one, to me, would be an expansion of ways to play the game. We're going to see that partially. We know we're going to have cooperative. That's great. It would be awesome to be able to have like a raid challenge mode, which was done well in here, or at least attempted well here. And then I think lastly, what can players do at official events? This sort of thing where I walked away with three of these cards and another 3 cards that just showed me, hey, these are the players I played. That's amazing. Stuff like that will really get people excited about coming to a table. And if you know that you can go and meet or try and take on a boss at a big event on a Sunday when they're having the top 8, or even in place of a battle hardened or something, where we know that we get something cool at the end just for showing up, not for winning, not for doing the best at it, but just for showing up and involving ourselves in the community. Because that's what we want to encourage. We want to encourage all the players to be there in the community, whether they're competing for a Pro Tour invite or trying to beat whoever the mayor of Metrics is. Those are the things I would take away from this, and what I'm hoping that we can take away for PvE in Flesh and Blood. Thank you for sticking with me, and we will talk about more of it later.